Welcome to the first session of our Communities of Belonging Learning series with our host, Michael Jones. In the series of generative conversations, Michael and his conversation partners will offer a richly textured and multidisciplinary examination of place. Throughout these conversations, we will be reminded that too often the places we create remain placeless because they do not include our stories. Today's session is entitled Belonging, Enlivement, and Wellbeing, and Michael has invited special guests, Daphne Mainprize, Kim Fedderson, and Steve Clarke to join him. I'd like to welcome the host of the Communities of Belonging series, Michael Jones, to the session today. We're so fortunate to have Michael Jones as one of our Tamarack thought leaders. Michael is a leadership educator, widely recognized pianist, composer, and conversation catalyst who has been convening forums on the soul of placemaking beginning with the support of the Banff Centre in 2010. Michael is also the author of The Soul of Place, Reimagining Leadership Through Nature, Art, and Community, which explores how our relationship with place deepens our connection with the core energetic patterns that form the undercurrents of life. I would also like to welcome our special guest for today's session. Daphne is the Curator Emeritus of the Stephen Leacock Museum, National Historical Site. Daphne worked for Parks Canada Agency in the Historic Sites and Monuments Directorate as a National Stakeholder Relations Specialist. She worked in public consultation of national parks and sites. In addition, Daphne was involved in the National Historic Sites Alliance and National Tourism Files. She's written 2 books, the first co-authored with J.A. that's Pete McGarvey, the Leacock Picture Book, Dundurn Press, 1997, and Stephen Leacock's Mariposa, 100 Years of Sunshine, also published by Dundurn Press in 2012. Currently, Daphne is chair of the board of the Aurelia Museum of Art and History. She is also co-chair of Mariposans for Refugees, and she's recently welcomed a Syrian family of 6 to Mariposa. Daphne also co-chairs the Mariposa Roundtable, a community group focused on stories of place, community narrative, and creative tourism. Kim is the principal of Lakehead Aurelia, was appointed its founding dean in 2007. Dr. Fedderson served as Aurelia Campus Dean from 2007 until 2012, before being appointed Dean and Vice Provost Aurelia Campus in January 2012. Prior to his appointment at the Aurelia Campus, he held a variety of positions at Lakehead University, Professor of English, Chair of the Department of English, 1997 to 2001, and Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, 2001 to 2006. Lakehead University recognized his contributions to teaching in 1998, naming him a distinguished instructor, and during his tenure as Chair of English and later as Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, he championed a variety of initiatives to enhance teaching and learning at the university. He's also taught at York University, Seneca College, Yunnan University in China, and Gifu University for Languages and Education in Japan. He was Vice President, Academic and Student Services at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, 2006 to 2007. An active researcher, he has published extensively on rhetorical theory and the history of rhetoric. He also works on post-secondary pedagogy, film, and Shakespearean adaptation. And lastly, but certainly not least, the Mayor of Aurelia, Steve Clarke. He has a lengthy track record of active support for the Aurelia community. He's been a community sports coach for over 17 years, supported numerous community causes and charities. In recognition of his community service, Steve was awarded the Rotary Club's Paul Harris Award. The Aurelia and District Chamber of Commerce has also recognized his work with the Strengthening Our Community Award and the Hats Off Award. Steve was named Business Leader of the Year with his wife Chris and Citizen of the Year. Steve has a strong appreciation for the heritage and cultural character of Aurelia. He even named his business Brewery Bay for the picturesque spot on Lake Couchiching where Stephen Leacock spent his summers. So I'll pass this over to you, Michael, and we're just so excited to have all of you with us today. And I'll let you take it over.
Wonderful, Devin. Thank you, and welcome everybody who's joining us for our webinar broadcast today on the theme of belonging. I think more than a job or even a career, what we most want to belong to is a story. This narrative serves as a gateway into our deep life together. Leaders in turn shape the culture of our community through the circulation of these stories that convey their core values and deepest aspirations. Our communities in turn become the public stage where the wisdom and uniqueness of these stories may be lived out. Yet too often, our places remain placeless because they do not include our stories. For the community of Orillia, Ontario, Mariposa is one of these larger-than-life stories. Created out of the fertile imagination of Canada's foremost humorist, Stephen Leacock, Mariposa's many enchanting stories are encoded with abundant insights into what it means to create community on a human scale. In this webinar today, we'll explore the pattern of belonging in the context of the story of Mariposa. We'll also explore how a story such as Mariposa can in turn be crafted into experiences for visitors and travelers that are both immersive and transformational. In so doing, we will discover how a story of place lies at the heart of city building and can serve as a catalyst for creating a living local economy, as well as a unifying vision of place to which everyone can belong. So this leads us to ask such questions as how can a community of story, a story of place, contribute to an ethic of local hospitality? What hidden community assets and potential does a story of place reveal? And what does it mean to create communities on a human scale? I'm delighted to have our guests today to engage in this exploration with us. I really have envisioned this series of webinars, beginning with the first one on the theme of homecoming, or what it means to grow down and become native to the place we find ourselves, and the second one rather, on regenerativity, which is awakening to a whole new mind and more of an indigenous feeling for life. And today's webinar on belonging has ways of beginning to explore the nature of place and placemaking and accessing the soul that underlies the work we're engaged in placemaking. So the question I'd like to begin with is just really the question of what brings us alive when we think of our story of place in our community. What's the potential we see with our story? And then we'd like to build out from that to explore sort of how we came to be where we are now and what we envision coming up in the future. So I'm delighted to have Steve and Daphne and Kim joining me today for this conversation. We'll start and sort of seed some thinking for the next 20 minutes or so and then turn it over for you to join in with us. And we're just delighted to hear not only your questions, certainly we'll welcome those, but also your insights and what's resonating for you in response to some of the things we're sharing with you. And the question I'd like to start with is what excites us about the nature of story and a story of place? What potential do we see in that? And then as we explore that, we'll then move on to share a little bit about how we've been building this sense of our story of place for our community over the last while and what we envision for the future. Kim, I wonder if I might invite you to step in and kind of help pick up the thread of this at the moment. And I know you've devoted about 4 years to our roundtable's work around the story. And what excites you about it? What's the potential you see? And from your perspective as an educator, what opportunities do you see for the students at Lakehead here in the community, for example, through coming into this community and in some way being connected to the story that we're generating?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I became aware of Leacock when I came to Orillia. Of course, I knew about Leacock's reputation before that, but I realized that people in this community had a really strong attachment to Leacock and to Sunshine Sketches. And we wanted to start an initiative here. We wanted to start a Center for Community Education. And I had floated the name the Leacock Centre for Arts, Culture, and Community. Mm-hmm. And with the plan of creating a whole series of cultural programs, artistic programs in the community that the university would launch and students would take. And it was just as we were starting the whole Mariposa initiative. And it was curious. Initially, we were focused very much on Leacock, the man. But it was curious. As we proceeded with the initiative, we ran into some kind of resistance to Leacock, the man. You know, that people looked at Leacock as a politically incorrect figure. Those were people within the university. And there was also some resistance to the kind of nostalgic pastoral vision of the small town that Leacock had. And that kind of critical response both to the man and the stories, certainly not unexpected within a university, which of course, you know, focuses on the critical analysis rather than simply the celebration of the past. But it was very clear that there was a recognition that Leacock had attempted to give this community a local habitation and a name, to quote Shakespeare, and that was a very laudable thing. and that we needed to expand our vision, not just to have the stories of sunshine sketches, but to include the stories that preceded sunshine sketches and the stories that would emerge from sunshine sketches. So we realized in that effort that through Leacock we could begin remembering sunshine sketches of a little town without necessarily getting uncritically mired in its nostalgic vision of the little town, but also it gave us an opportunity to recall the time before the stories of sunshine sketches of a little town, the deep Aboriginal stories, the stories of Aurelia as a gathering place, the stories of the sun, the rising red sun, and Aurelia as a place where everyone came together. And that we could use that vision as a way to inform the future stories that we would tell to ourselves. And I found this we found this here at the university, a very profound way to situate ourselves within this place, within this community, that it had a real sense of itself that could be informed by sunshine sketches, but not limited to sunshine sketches and Leacock. And on the basis of that, imagine what our community could be going forward. So a community filled with meaning. So, and that's still a platform for, and very much a platform for the university and the students to move forward to. This is a community that is embedded with its stories and fulfilled by its stories, and we want our students to become a part of that story making and storytelling.
Wonderful. Yeah, it really has a generational significance to it as well, doesn't it?
Indeed it does.
Yeah, and Daphne, I'm curious because as I listened to Kim describe his experience and his perspective on this, there was a moment I remember, and this was with Kim in one of our meetings, when he said, you know, this is not only about Stephen Leacock, this is really about Mariposa. And you could tell there was a dramatic shift in the tone of that meeting at that very moment, as if we had captured the essential image of what the story of our community was about. And I was going to invite Kim to comment on that, but I'd also be particularly curious for you to comment on it because you witnessed it in a sense, and you've experienced it in perhaps in another way.
It was, I think, what we called in that meeting our aha moment, because as a group we had come together in September of that year, and it was the December meeting, and we started to work around, as Kim is saying, the whole imagery of Leacock and what that meant. And we're hitting some of the same sorts of roadblocks and imagery that Kim is referring to with the university. And our conversation was quite amazing, because all of a sudden there was a realization that it was the universality of the concept of Mariposa, which was the portal into the stories, the place where you could enter into all the stories of our community. And in fact, that opened the door when you consider the universality of, you know, how Leacock described Mariposa in Sunshine Sketches, and the people and the place, the sense of place. He very deeply understood the sense of place and the people of this community in 1912 when Sunshine Sketches was written. But the concept of Mariposa, the community, the stories that evolved over time that go before 1912, thousands of years back, our First Nations stories in this community, the Fishweers, go back 5,000 years, and then how to go forward. And we had that moment where we realized the universality and the concept of Mariposa really was the overarching imagery and continuum that we could use going forward. And that, from that moment on, was a very exciting opportunity for our group, the Mariposa Roundtable, because we then knew that we had tapped into the way forward.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think of a symbol, I think of Mariposa as the butterfly. And when I think of the butterfly, I think of not taking ourselves too seriously. Something about the quality of the lightness of being.
Yes.
I think that was a theme with Stephen Leacock, was also not to take ourselves too seriously, and how to celebrate our essential humanity, including our imperfections in some way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Michael, I think that's absolutely key to this. That the stories of Sunshine Sketches, they're pastoral stories, but because they have that comic element, that not taking things too seriously, it gives us a space it gives us the opportunity to open up that space and bring other stories in, and conflicting visions, and set up that kind of dialogue.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's beautiful. Steve, I'd love to hear your perspective as well, as somebody who has a business on Main Street and thinking about how a story, a place, in a sense, is a way of revitalizing the Main Streets in our communities, of revitalizing our local economies, as being, in a sense, held under a common kind of the strength and power of a common narrative. What excites you about our story, and what opportunities or potential do you see with that? I was just checking in. I don't know if they may not have Steve on the line at this point.
Are you there, Michael?
Well, there you are, Steve.
Oh, there he is.
Sorry, okay. I thought I was hands-free. I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem.
Anyway, if I could reflect on one of Kim's comments, I find it interesting that our story, or our character as we know it today, is partly defined by this self-deprecation we had as a community that Leacock defined. And so by poking fun at our character, we've actually defined our character. I find that quite interesting. But I do believe that it means that we do need to have a sense of humor.
Right.
And Michael, and you're bang on, certainly from my position these days, what excites me is the way forward. And I think the time is ripe for this. I've attended a few different conferences, and more out of these, a lot of the discussion at these conferences is more around what I would describe as a changing value system. More and more, in particular, the younger demographics are choosing place over what I would describe as setting, and certainly are willing to make decisions based on the quality of life they perceive they would have, more than just strictly on employment. And so certainly, as I say, in this office, that's something that gets me quite excited. And quite frankly, I'd like to tap into a number of those students that Kim gets to shape and be involved with for 4 years, and have them be excited by our community while they're here, and maybe settle roots here.
Right, and that they would stay and make their investments.
Yeah, that's right.
Make a home here.
And help define our character going forward, or our story going forward.
Sure, wonderful. Yeah. And as we're talking about place, and we're talking about Mariposa as being a defining image of the spirit of our place, I think every community has its own Mariposa, is my impression. I think the image will be different for each community, but I think each, in one way or another, can tap into this kind of sense that there's some kind of overarching image or narrative that speaks deeply about what the nature and essential identity of that community is. And Daphne and I, for example, went and offered an experience of place and placemaking to another community north of where we are here in Aurelia, and found the language that came up for them around their sense of place was quite unique and distinctive from the language we've used here in talking about our place. Daphne, could you highlight a little bit of that from what you noticed in your report?
Well, what was interesting is we are talking about the sense of place, and after we had the day in the other community north of Aurelia, what came out of that were some keywords. So Michael and I have put together a framework for these experiencing days, where we can actually look at the keywords if we take notes throughout the day, and then put them into a framework. And we've had 3-day in Mariposa experiences, and we're really seeing some interesting language that really clearly defines that community's stories and their sense of place. So what we found with this newest experience was really a different set of words and languages, but fundamentally coming from the same, elemental place in thinking of a community and its stories. Interestingly enough, the community that we had met with saw themselves in quite a different way and really hadn't clearly understood their stories. And as they spent the day working through it, the language came out. And so, interestingly enough, we realized we were also creating not just a sense of place, but a language of place. And the language is defined by the stories of each community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's one of the real benefits in having conversations about place and around the story of place, is it gives us a language with which to speak about the aspirations we have for our community and what we want it to become, and how the history of the community in some ways also carries within it perhaps the seed or the potential for what it can become. But it's hard to create a future without a language to describe it.
Michael, I think you're bang on. We need to we need to certainly know our history and the language in which we could describe our story going forward. One of the challenges I see is taking, for example, what Daphne and Michael would learn on doing an event like that, and taking what people see as their story and putting it, adding tangible measures to enhance that story and create that excitement and in the end, that sense of belonging. And that's and as I say, from where I sit, that's the challenge that I see. How do we, what concrete or more tangible measures we put in place to repeat that story and enhance it, whether that's culture, primarily from a cultural standpoint, or protecting and enhancing our natural environment, telling the historical stories, providing the services that will allow people the time and the quality of life to enjoy and enhance that story. And I mean, sometimes it even comes down to employment. If they can't have a sustainable existence in a community and as I say, enjoy and be a part of that story, then unfortunately we're in danger of losing them.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Yeah. Steve, we were delighted to offer a day in Mariposa a couple of months back, where we had invited yourself and council and senior staff in the city to think deeply about our sense of place and its significance, and to reflect on what kind of assets that might be revealed to our own community, to our sense of place. What do you carry from that experience that we had together those months back that has kind of carried through with you today?
Well, for me, first of all, both you and Daphne created a lot of excitement around the room. I mean, it was a fairly large group in the end, and with our senior staff and members of council, you created a real sense of excitement. What I got out of it in particular was a reminder that with everything that we have going on in our day-to-day lives, is that we need to take time to appreciate where we've come from. As Daphne has alluded to, from a human perspective, we go back over 5,000 years in this area, and up to our industrial past and into our what I call a rich and vibrant arts and cultural community now. To me, that's what it was. It was more of a grounding day and a reminder where we've come from, and when we are looking at issues. I mean, you certainly you were talking to senior staff and certainly talking to members of council. So we're confronted with decisions on a daily basis and the different degrees. And I think we need to remind ourselves that whenever we make a decision, we need to consider our story, consider our character, and do things to enhance that. So to me, it was a grounding day that kind of reiterated values that we can use as a council going forward.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's helpful to hear.
Yeah.
I think I remember one of the counselors saying, you know, what the value of the story of place is it offers a touchstone.
Yes, that's right, it was.
You can reference everything back to that touchstone in terms of what we want to create. How is that reflected in our built environment and the redevelopment of our downtown, of our waterfront? Is there ways that we can imagine how we do the city building in the future that where buildings, in a sense, tell a story and carry that?
Always referring to the touchstone, yes.
Yeah, always having that as a point of reference. Kim and Daphne, I invite you to come in with what's on your mind as we've been talking in the last few minutes.
Yeah, Michael, I find this such an interesting area, especially, you know, at this particular moment in modernity, where we often live lives that are unconnected to the histories that inform those lives and shape those lives. And those histories come to us in the form of stories, and not just stories and narrative, but we're also talking about painting, oral tradition, we're talking about architecture, we're talking about the cityscape. All of those things inform the spaces that we live in, and that's what transforms those spaces, undifferentiated spaces, into places, right? It turns space into a place, it makes the place a home, a place that has been filled with meaning. And what I find so interesting about Aurelia is that the stories that inform it, the meanings that shape it, they are really apparent. And so anybody coming from the outside sees that Leacock heritage. It's so visible here in the landscape. And then the question is, well, how does one maintain that and move that forward without obscuring the stories that preceded it? In fact, bringing those stories forward as well, because they inform and shape the identity of the people in the community. And to use that as a touchstone, as the grounding, as Steve has said, to move the community forward, so that everyone in the community has a sense of their place within that story. And when you have that sense of your place within the story, then that's how your life gets meaning. And your city is not simply a place to facilitate your making an income, a place where you sleep in order that you can get up and go to work. It becomes an endpoint for you. It becomes the context in which you make your life that fills your life with meaning. And I think it's what can distinguish every community from, well, can distinguish certainly this community from communities that have lost that sense of identity and simply become places where people live in order to make a living. But here you can get a sense of, and I think we can actually support this, get a sense of how we can live our lives within that story and move that story forward, giving our lives meaning. That's much more obscure than I want it to be about that, but I think this is it's a very profound thing, this transformation of an undifferentiated space into a meaningful place. And I just think that Aurelia has so many advantages because many of its stories are legible. They're there. They're apparent. We just need to make sure that they stay present and evolve.
Michael, if I could, I think Kim articulated that wonderfully. The only thing I would add to that is the degree to which we can include as many people as possible. To me, it's almost like democracy. Democracy, to me, only really works when everybody benefits from it. So, you know, the degree to which we can get complete inclusiveness, and so that there's, you know, a true feeling of place by all in the community. That means something for everyone. And I don't know if that's probably utopian, but I think that's probably a goal.
Yeah, I think it offers some. What I found is when people come together to have conversations around place, those are some of the most animated, engaged, and lively conversations I've experienced, and in some ways they're almost healing conversations, because people heal some of the sense of isolation and disconnection from place that they've been feeling.
I also think when we did our experiencing a day north of Orillia, what we also are discovering is the pathways between communities. When each community, and if we look at our own region, begins to talk about their stories and their sense of place, then they can support each other and create those pathways for people, not just citizens, to engage with each other in different communities, but also on a more national and global level. So it does become an opportunity to a modern version of nation building within the context of the stories and the sense of place.
That's a wonderful concept, Daphne, the idea of nation building and democracy, that these are ways by which we begin to set large forces into play that can draw people together in some kind of common ground in terms of the affection and love we have for a particular place. Many people who can be a part of that conversation. Daphne, just to build on that, could you comment just a bit about the nature of the roundtable that has been engaged in some of this work and its diversity?
The Mariposa Roundtable came together 4 years ago in September. It formulated as a result of my retiring and coming back to Orillia, and there had been a study completed in 1997 related to Leacock and the Leacock Museum. There was a lot of really interesting information within that study, and so the idea was there anything left in there that would be worth going back to and revisiting in the context of Orillia today, 20 years later, or not quite 20. And so we started to bring together a group of people. First, there was and Fred Addis, and then we brought in Kim Fedderson, Mariel Farrow-Bauer from Georgian College. We brought in a wide range of community stakeholder groups and people, representative of those groups, and started to build not only a conversation among ourselves about each of our places that we represented, but the whole Mariposa concept. And so I go back to that December meeting when we had our aha moment and realized that the universality of the concept of Mariposa was a way to tap into the past, the present, and the future. And from then, the Mariposa Roundtable's work just continued to build and grow. To today, when we are now building more extensive partnerships and moving ourselves from the thinking process of gathering the stories and trying to see where that might take us to the actual doing part. How can we make those stories become tools that the community can use, Mayor Clarke can use, different organizations can use to generate a creative economy.
And it's interesting when I think of the roundtable that we had people come from the religious community. We had an Indigenous elder and storyteller. We had conservation and environment, downtown business, professional, and academic and education, and the arts and culture. And what I was envisioning is how a group came together to do the research around our sense of place. It came from many, many different diverse perspectives. And how you begin to do your community building by having a nucleus that can begin to do the higher level thinking that can lead to a larger and greater level of community engagement over time around the story.
Yeah, Michael, that goes to what Steve was talking about, is the democratic and inclusive aspect of this.
Very much.
Those conversations that we had, that small group of us, they were just so informative. I was learning so much about this community in those conversations. And it began from that small nugget of sunshine sketches of a little town, but opened up so that it reached back, to 5,000 years in the past with the founding of the fish weavers. And all these events that preceded Canadian history, and then started to project forward about, well, how does the story of Aurelia and the stories that are informed by that past move forward, and how can we invite other people into this so that they can actually participate in these stories? It was a really intellectually thrilling moment, and a series of moments, and so informative. And I think also has real practical application, that to use that storied history in its manifold sense as a platform to present Aurelia both to Aurelians and to the world, so that people can come here and experiencing the stories that we've been telling ourselves, but also experience the way in which we're trying to talk about storytelling as a way of community making and community building, so that elsewhere can see how they can do this for their communities. Because as you point out, every community has its stories, but sometimes those stories get lost or forgotten, or somehow they get dulled, and but they can be revived and restored, and in being revived and restored, have a restorative influence on their communities.
It's true, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost as if these stories are hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
It takes a particular way of seeing in order to bring them alive again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Devin, we're at a stage now, I think, in our conversation where I'd like to open it up to anyone else who has a question or a reflection or an experience or story they'd like to share with us.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. Gosh, it was so interesting to be listening in on this conversation, and I haven't received any questions yet from our attendees. But I was really curious when I was listening to Daphne speak, specifically about, the power of language and how words can really help shape and define the future of our community in Aurelia. And I was wondering if it might be possible to share some of those words that really came up in those conversations, both in Aurelia, but also in the other community that you were mentioning up north, and how they might differ from each other. Is that something you could jump in on, Daphne, and share with us?
Yes, I think obviously, some of the experiences and words that come out represent the place itself. So, for example, the place north of here is, again, on the water, but very much surrounded by rock, and so wind-swept west winds. The trees are all sort of bending toward, from the west wind. And so some of that, because of the environment they live in, which is much more less populated than Aurelia, and so there's much of the natural environment still in existence, they're very, very attuned to that. The language that was coming out was elemental, mythic, the rocks speaking, the Aboriginal stories, the First Nations stories, the ancestors, as well as recognizing that they were a little more gritty, and some of their stories were just a little different than ours in the way they perceived where they have come from and where they are today and where they'd like to go. The Mariposa story words have a little bit of a different tone to them. They're much quieter, more connected to Mariposa and the front porch. And I think also when we did the day in Mariposa for the Mayor and Council, those were some of the words that came up: front porch, lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Erie, and some of those places. So the language is often, the words and language are often around the actual environment that the place exists within.
Yes.
And also the spirit of the place that has come before. And in one section we actually have economics as a line and the words that go under that, because what we're trying to demonstrate is some of these thoughts and themes and words actually can translate into building an economy, a thriving, sustainable economy.
Well, that's just so fascinating.
So the next bit of our work is to sort of take that language and that sense of place and move it into opportunities.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Daphne. That answered my question so thoroughly. Thanks.
I think they really felt themselves to be off the beaten track, and they're sort of living on the rock, that's some of the oldest rock on the planet.
Well, yeah,
and it did contribute to a sense of grittiness and the elemental nature of it, because the presence of rock and water and light and wind are so central. And here, I think there's a sense of the gentleness of the land.
Yeah.
And I think it brings into awareness, when we're thinking about place, of all the different dimensions that we can speak about in terms of where the story occupies a place in sort of our larger bioregion, as well as in our watersheds and in the anthropological history, as well as the historical highlights. And then there's a sociological dimension to it, an economic dimension, a mythic dimension, a spiritual dimension. There's so many different levels that come alive around our stories of place as we begin to explore them vertically and horizontally.
Yes, I actually had another, building on that, Michael, I have a question that came in from one of our attendees, Michael Williams, and his question is, and I'll just put it to the entire panel if anyone wants to jump in. His question is, what are your views on the challenges of overarching narratives of place? How do we make room for all stories past and present and those which are evolving?
Oh, what a spectacular question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to jump in, Jericho?
Yeah, I do. That was one of the real issues that we had to wrestle with, and it was one of the things that caused us to migrate from the name of the author, Stephen Leacock, to the name of the stories, from the stories, Mariposa. And then as we began, because we found Leacock constraining, and then we found Mariposa much more open, but even so, Mariposa and the stories of Sunshine Sketches are constrained as well. And so we spent a lot of time with that group exploring the concept of Mariposa to see if it in fact was sufficiently capacious, expansive enough to include all of the stories that we wanted to include. No, excuse me, to include all of the stories that come from this place. And there were very interesting discussions about that. It was finally the sense that because, and Steve, you talked about this earlier, because there's this self-deprecating sense of Aurelia as a community that can laugh at itself, it was that element of humor embedded in Sunshine Sketches, that satirical pastoral, that allowed kind of the opening for multiple stories to come in without being completely undermined and contaminated for it. And this was it was a very moving set of conversations, because one of the Aboriginal elders who was involved in our discussions, I was very interested to see whether he would find the narrative space that we were trying to articulate sufficiently inviting and inclusive. And indeed he did. And that was a real transformative moment for the group, so that Mariposa became a space that would happily invite all of the stories in without pushing other stories out.
Kim, I think you've hit that really well. It was a galvanizing.
Yeah.
When you turned that around and presented it to us in the day that we had it at Leacock, when Mark was participating and bringing some of the First Nation traditions with us, because we talked a few minutes ago about inclusivity and making it as an inclusive process as possible. But I don't think you can do that unless you're including all the stories from our past. And sometimes it's even possible that some of those stories aren't positive stories, but they have created part of the fabric of who we are, and we need to include them.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point, Steve, too. I think that's the power of stories, that stories can hold the entire emotional life of a community. Not only the positive dimensions, but also the other, other more contrary dynamics, I think, can all be held and carried through the language of story.
I look at something like the Champlain Monument in Couchiching Park, which is such a complex, contradictory story. A story actually written in bronze and stone that sits there that tells the story of colonialization, of civilization, of settlers coming here, of the impression of Aboriginal people, and it informs our identity. And so if one can look at that monument and see it in its complexity and all of its contradictions, that informs our character. It doesn't limit our character, it informs our character. And provides that kind of touchstone that we have to be informed by, because of course it's a monument to the history of colonialization, but it's also this monument to the folly of colonialization as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to reinforce that imperialist story. In fact, it undermines that imperialist story simultaneously. And there's so much to learn from that. And Mark Douglas, the elder, certainly helped us see that in his discussions about Mariposa.
That's a great illustration, Kim, of including all the stories. Some we don't necessarily want to repeat over and over, but again, it's all part of what makes has created our whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a pianist, I think of, you have to play all full 88 notes on the piano and only play 62 of them and get a song.
Yeah.
And also as an improviser, you're always having to be open to shifting structures, because at some point the structure you're working within is going to be too narrow or limited for the energy you're bringing into the creation. And so the stories, I think, continue to evolve. We found, for example, working in this other community, the stories they are telling themselves seemed initially to be ones that reinforced their sense of isolation and inferiority because they were small, they were kind of off the beaten track and so on. But as they went through the day, spoke about the aliveness that they found in different parts of their community, their story shifted to one more of resilience and self-sufficiency. They could see the hidden strengths in stories that had, prior to our work with them perhaps, had been kind of diminishing their sense of self, but were able to see a more expansive sense of their own possibility. Daphne, I know that we're kind of moving into a phase in the work of the Roundtable in partnership with the Aurelia Center for Art and History of beginning to tell more stories in the community. Could you say a few words about that?
Yes, we have an opportunity to work with the Aurelia Museum of Art and History to put together an exhibition which would, we're hoping, become a traveling exhibit. It would be launched in Aurelia, and it would be in Aurelia for the duration of 2017, because Aurelia is celebrating its 150th anniversary at the same time Canada is in 2017. So this exhibit would be developed in collaboration with OMA and the Mariposa Roundtable. It will showcase some of the stories and be an interactive opportunity to engage the community and indeed engage national and global audiences. The idea would be that we would then be able to, after 2017, allow this exhibition to go to different places in Canada and other countries as opportunities open up. Another piece to that is that we will be developing a 15-month community engagement opportunity, which will include festivals and events and concerts and activities all around the story, but also engaging artists and artisans, trades, and into being able to showcase their work and show the community and how we can bring the stories to life and make them something that will allow people to work and stay in this community for a long time.
an exciting vision because it offers up the possibility of the community engaging in the form of tourism and destination experiences that are not passive in the way in which people simply move from one exhibit or display to another, but where people can become actively engaged and transformed through working in partnership with creators in the community.
And we have a framework that we will be using as part of the tools to develop the way forward, and it's 7 stories, 7 places, 7 days. And that framework will allow us to move around to these key places that have been identified in our area, in our community, and showcase the stories of the community and create a framework by which we can, you know, at some point in the future, have opportunities for people to participate from anywhere in the world and experience Mariposa hands-on. So we're essentially talking about experiential travel and, you know, engaging people in our community so that they feel like while they are here, they're part of our story.
Wonderful. I think as the Australian songlines, where you can move, in a sense, create a story field, joined up by connecting points of connection from one story place to another, and how you can bring the community alive in that way.
Oh, yeah.
Daphne, back. Oh. Sorry.
I wonder if I might just be able to jump in with one last question to you, or sort of a reflection from one of our attendees, Michael.
Sure.
So here, this is from Ian Wright, and he writes, given the observations around the universality of Mariposa and the inquiry around my Mariposa, might there be complementary explorations around other Mariposa-type constructs? I find myself thinking of a recent exploration on the theme of making a place we can all call home, and how this benefited from some blessings from John O'Donohue from his book Benedictus to bless the space between us. His Mariposa would be Anam Cara from Celtic spirituality, conveying a loving soul's connection on a grand, universal, global scale. Any thoughts on an interest in our Anam Cara on par with my Mariposa?
It's wonderful hearing that. I had that in mind when I thought of how the space between the stories, the 7 places, 7 stories, the 7 places between are significant. We also geographically, and the biofield here is one where we live in a space between here in Aurelia, and it's been very much a part of the Indigenous story of being in an in-between place, a meeting place between the Precambrian Shield to the north and the Limestone Plain to the south, both very distinct biospheres. And there's something about the fish weirs, the joining of the 2 lakes, this always being a gathering place and a meeting place that is sort of part of our anthropology in a sense, that now becomes a part of our mythology as well. It's a lovely opening too, and an invitation. I know we're coming to a close, and I'd like to invite our conversational partners here, Steve and Daphne and Kim, to just share a brief reflection, if you could, just what kind of stands out for you from today's conversation before I turn it over to you, Devin.
Sure.
Well, for me, I guess it's these times, as the day at the Leacock home was, a time of reflection and a time of being reminded that we need to include these stories so that we have an appreciation of where we come from, and certainly understand and appreciate what we have now, and I think out of that comes a sense of belonging. But also, as I mentioned earlier, it's a reminder, you know, when whatever you're doing for a living, and certainly making the decisions that affect the community, that you go back to your, as we said earlier, touchstones or your values. And I think those values can be created and driven by the story that got us here. So for me, it's just a grounding reminder.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Kim, Daphne?
Well, as so often, I get inspired by these conversations, and as this conversation has transpired, it made me think that just in terms of my own experience, I feel so fortunate to live in a place that is connected to its history and its culture and is trying to maintain that connection. Any community can have an East Side Mario's. Any community can have a Dollarama. Any community can have a Costco. Those are ubiquitous, and some of those names come from elsewhere. But in Aurelia, we have a brewery bay. And Steve, I just think it's such a wonderful thing that you connected with that touchstone, that piece of history, and gave that name to your restaurant on Mississauga Avenue. And that's the kind of practical, concrete, economic activity that's informed by the narrative, informed by the stories, and buttresses the stories going forward. Not a constraint, but actually something that opens up a meaningful place that the rest of us can inhabit. So I just feel very fortunate to live in a community that has that historical sense of itself and is using it as a platform for its future.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim. Daphne, just
I think what has inspired me and certainly been a bit of a magical moment is how the Mariposa Roundtable, in embarking upon our work, which when we began, we weren't sure where that journey was going to take us, and that was part of the plan in not defining our terms of reference, for example, in any clear way, but by allowing the stories to lead us where we wanted to go. And there would be some meetings where we would feel like we might be hitting a wall and not sure which direction to go, and all of a sudden something would open up and we'd all shift over like the ball had moved, and there would not be a lot of discussion. It would be like, whoa, yes, this is where we need to go. We have some clarity now, and follow that path. So the whole experience of where we have come to today with the Mariposa Roundtable and the conversations has been part of the process of keeping ourselves open and non-judgmental about where we need to go in the end. And it has been at times difficult where we have to stop and think, what does this mean and where are we at and where should we be? But when we allowed ourselves to just let the stories lead us, we have come to a wonderful place in time right now. And the future opportunities and the activities that we're embarking upon are pretty exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Kim. It's wonderful to have you as partners in the conversation today. And knowing that some of the insights we came up with through the conversation may be different from what we may have come out had in our minds when we came on the call, which is part of the generative creative process we've been engaged in together. What comes to mind for me is when everything looks the same, there is no such thing as place any longer. And
well said.
So the stories really become essential to not so much retrieving our past. We may not be able to do that, but we can learn from it, and this learning lead to a vision of the future, which can bring forth our gifts and unique talents and create a place of belonging where everyone can grow and thrive. So thank you again, and Devin, I'll turn it back to you, and hope to see you in our next broadcast.
Yeah, thank you. Well said, everyone. I really enjoyed listening to you all reflect today, and specifically Daphne and Michael, what a nice way to sort of end the thoughts on our discussion today. Thank you for that. Thank you so much, Michael, Daphne, Kim, and Steve, for sharing your insights and perspectives with us all on the call today. Many thanks to all of you for joining us and taking the time to share. Your comments and questions have helped to make this dynamic and thought-provoking conversation, all of you that attended today. We would also like to thank our supporters, Human Resources and Social Development Canada, Maytree Foundation, J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Ontario for making all of these calls possible. As promised, in a few days, we'll email you with links to the audio and other material related to today's call. We also welcome your feedback on these calls, so please do email Tamarack to let us know how we're doing. A friendly reminder that the session will be posted on our online library at www.deepeningcommunity.ca. This website also includes relevant resources and fresh content from our thought leaders and our learning community. We encourage you to go online and register for the next transformative celebration, the Commons and Thrivability, Reimagining Placemaking Through Local Living Economies. It'll be held on Friday, June 24th, 2016, from 12 to 1 Eastern. On this call, Michael will be joined by Tulupi Ilasanmi, founder of Zenith Cleaning and as Craft and Practice, Michelle Holliday, co-author of Living Systems and the Practice of Stewarding Change, consultant and researcher, and also Ben Wolf, the co-founder of the Peterborough Dialogues and Peterborough Green Up, communicator and community builder. Finally, we just have some other exciting news as well. We encourage you to visit our website, www.tamarackcommunity.ca, to learn more. Sign up for our monthly e-magazine, Engage. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been a true pleasure, and I can't wait to get back to the Sunshine City next weekend and see my family there. So thanks to you all, and have a great day.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Michael, Kim, and Daphne. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.